Carleton, in pursuing this matter, I wanted to know why we get the flavor, and as a member of the opposition, I certainly agree that we want to get to the bottom of matters that are being covered up. But this motion smacks of flavor of the day in the We Charity scandal. I'm much more concerned with obstruction of justice in the matter of the SNC-Lavalin question, in which our former Minister of Justice was pushed to do things that were potentially obstruction of justice. That does require a deeper investigation. Does the honourable member for Carleton not agree with me that it would be more impressive if the official opposition stuck to matters that are potentially criminal as opposed to those that seem to be chasing headlines?
Honourable member for Carleton.
Well, I think the member puts me in a very difficult dilemma. Which scandal do you choose from? Right? You had an obstruction of justice case where they threw the Attorney General out because she wouldn't help a corporate criminal get off charges. And she had the courage to stand her ground and take that political demotion in order to preserve her principles. And yes, I do believe, to the member's question, that is a legitimate matter. And I ask other Liberal members to have the courage of the former Attorney General. You know, in the world's broad field of battle, in the bivouac of life, be not like dumb driven cattle, be a hero in the strife.
Member for Carleton.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. We are in the middle of a pandemic, and Canada's economy has suffered more than most. In fact, the Canadian government has the biggest deficit in the G20. Out of 20 countries, this is the biggest deficit as a share of GDP anywhere. The highest unemployment in the G7, higher than the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Italy, Germany, and Japan, much higher, in fact. And that is why I rise today, and will be splitting my time with the member for St. Albert, to implore the House to get back to the people's work. This government has basically shut down the Finance Committee, which is necessary to respond to this economic calamity and to Canada's poor economic performance, in order to cover up the release of blacked out We scandal documents and to prevent questioning of government and other officials about that same scandal. Not only did the Prime Minister shut down this place in August, for over 6 weeks, Parliament was unable to do its work to fight for the Canadian economy, to defend the lives and livelihoods of Canadians. When they got back here, they decided to cripple at least 3 parliamentary committees, Health, Ethics, and Finance, to prevent them from working on our pandemic response and repairing the enormous economic disadvantage that we face here in Canada. Concerned with the destruction of small businesses and the loss of jobs and Canada's poor performance, bottom of the pack, Conservatives came forward with a nonpartisan proposal which would take the We scandal out of the Finance Committee and put it in a special standalone investigative committee. Let Finance do Finance, let Health do Health, and let this special committee examine this file. Let's get back to work for Canadians. We expected that this would be a unanimous proposition, given that the Prime Minister claims to be so concerned about the well-being of Canadians in this pandemic and this economic shutdown. But instead, the Prime Minister has said the opposite. He said, if you investigate the We scandal any further, I will bring down my own government and force an election in the middle of the second wave of a pandemic. Wow. And by the way, he says he's got nothing to hide. In other words, there is no secret, but we are prepared to cause an election to prevent it from coming out. Right? Nobody believes that. Thou doth protest too much, Prime Minister. If you had nothing to hide, you would not have shut down, through the Speaker, Parliament in the first place. If there was nothing to hide, he would not be threatening to bring his government down today. And if he did, we can only imagine what his campaign slogan will be. Give me a majority so that no one can investigate me. That is effectively what he's asking for. In fact, what is ironic about his election threat is that he admits it has nothing to do with any policy agenda. He doesn't claim that there's some policy action for Canadians he'd like to take but can't because he's in a minority parliament. He admits that he's able to do everything from a public policy point of view that he wants to do. It's just that he can't tolerate the thought that one little committee might ask some inconvenient little questions about that affair that saw him and his family receive over $500,000 from a group and then have him intervene to give that same group $500 million. All we want to do is ask a few little questions about that. We don't want to stand in the way of the government's policy responses. If they are meritorious, they will pass through the House of Commons. We don't want to stand in the way of a single solitary parliamentary committee. Let them all do their work. Let's take this wee matter, which the Prime Minister finds so agonizingly distracting, and put it in a separate place, a safe space, where everyone can ask some direct questions and use the powers of Parliament to get some direct answers. Mais, pour quelques raisons, le Premier...
But for some reason, the Prime Minister seems to be experiencing a personal crisis at the very thought that these questions be asked. The very idea that a non-redacted document be made public, that seems to be causing a crisis in the Liberal ranks. And now we're being threatened with an election in order to prevent the truth from coming out. Madam Speaker, this is not the behavior of a Prime Minister with nothing to hide. This is the behavior of someone with big secrets. Someone who wants to avoid having the truth come out. He's even willing to shut down Parliament to avoid having the truth come out. And now he is willing to trigger an election in the middle of a pandemic, the second wave of a pandemic, in order to prevent the truth from coming out. That is the behavior of a Prime Minister with serious secrets to hide.
Understand why he would be ashamed for all of this to be known. Here's a great social justice warrior who's gone around telling us how much he's concerned about the downtrodden. He's a big believer, he tells us, in redistributing wealth from those who have to those that have not. That's funny, because when it comes to him, he has no problem taking money from charities, money that was that little kids donated, with the expectation that it would go to poor people in developing countries, and putting that money in his own millionaire pocket. His family are millionaires. They inherited, of course, from his grandfather, who was a petroleum magnate. He made lots of money in the energy business and passed it down. So you have a millionaire Prime Minister. You'd think if he were such a social justice warrior, he'd be giving money to charities, that his family would be in a rush to hand that money out to those with less. But no, he's the exact opposite of Robin Hood. He steals from the poor to give to the rich, especially himself. And here again, we have an example of that. And speaking of that, what kind of charity spends $500,000 to pay an ultra-rich and politically powerful family, or takes a multi-millionaire who used to run a billion-dollar company on a $41,000 all expenses paid vacation. When those little school kids were raising pennies, quarters, and loonies in order, they thought, to help the world's less fortunate, do you think any of them were told that the money would be used to pay off the Prime Minister's millionaire family, or to take the multimillionaire finance minister and his family on luxurious vacations? Of course not. This is not just an example of corruption, but of gross personal hypocrisy. And that is why the Prime Minister would prefer that we all just stop talking about it. Not just prefer, but he is willing to shut down the function of government in the middle of a pandemic to force an end to this conversation. Well, I ask, where does that stop? Will it hereafter be a precedent that whenever a scandal gets too close to the Prime Minister, that he can simply put an end to Parliament and call an election? That effectively opposition members are banned from asking questions about how he uses public funds to reimburse those who have paid his family? Is that the precedent we now set? Are we really going to devolve to a point where a Prime Minister is king, where he slams his fist and says he's heard enough, he wants no more questions, he wants all investigations to cease, and if they don't, well, he'll bring the whole place tumbling down? Well, that is the precedent that the Prime Minister seeks to create. But we will not be deterred. We were elected to hold the government account, and we will do exactly that. We will get to the bottom of this scandal, and we will further propose key measures to ensure that no Prime Minister is able to enrich himself at public expense the way this Prime Minister has.